options trading as a business. Today's presentation is by Eurotrade, the investment bank. The easiest way to make money in real estate today, with the least amount of risk and using very little capital and an extremely high amount of leverage, is with options. Not lease options, but the ordinary standard real estate options, which are used mainly by investors and by builders in very expensive markets. The advantages are there's a lot more certainty than dealing with lease options, and there's a lot more money, and you only need to deal with investors who actually have money rather than tenant buyers who generally come along to be a lease option buyer because their credit is in disrepair and they cannot purchase a property through the normal channels. Generally they would not qualify for finance, and they probably do not have terribly much in the way of deposit for the typical mortgage. The concerns with tenant buyers start with the fact that they have little money, but there's also a major concern is over 40% of tenant buyers are not able to proceed to purchase properties because their credit still remains in disrepair at the end of the lease option term. There's also problems with consumer legislation, which makes it fairly inhibiting to actually get involved with lease options, which put a cap on what you can actually take as a option fee and the manner in which you can proceed in your business. There's no certainty of a tenant buyer ever being able to purchase the property at the end of the option period, and this is not necessarily just due to poor credit. It could be the fact that the tenant buyer in fact simply doesn't want to proceed with the purchase. That then leaves the seller with a property that he wanted to sell, thought he had sold, but at the end of the option term it still hasn't been sold. There's quite a number of demerits with lease options. The first, though, being it's difficult to find qualified tenant buyers. Doesn't mean that they're impossible to find. However, you can't simply walk down the street and find a person who wants to rent a property having the capacity to pay an option fee that the real estate wholesaler is requesting. Lease options do not make the real estate wholesaler rich. In fact, the fees that the lease option produces for a real estate wholesaler is quite considerably less than what a standard real estate option can produce. When the option is sold to the tenants, there's actually a small premium, generally under 5% of the value of the property. And while there is a rental income over and above the standard market rate of rent, it's incrementally insignificant compared to the capital profits that can be made buying and selling the properties or buying and selling the options as well. It's generally only the sandwich options which are lucrative, and in the main there aren't that many sandwich options being done by real estate wholesalers. Now, we do not deal in lease options. We do not want to sell options to tenant buyers that have meagre finance and probably dud you in terms of at the end of the lease term, not proceed to purchase the property. The properties that we deal with are sold, or the options are sold to investors. The properties can remain occupied by the owner, or they can be rented out, the owner can manage the tenancies themselves, or a manager can be put in to manage the property for them. So why trade real estate options? Well, it's simply because of the money. Instead of buying actual property, investors can buy real estate options as an alternative way to invest with just a fraction of the outlay. So there's an enormous leverage, there's low costs, there are few expenses, and there's virtually no risk. There's a slight risk, and I'll mention that briefly later on. Because of the massive leverage though, the ROI is enormous and far bigger than what can be achieved buying physical properties. Who uses real estate options? I touched on this briefly. They're most often used by property developers and by investors in commercial or high-end residential property. They're not used on very cheap properties. There's hardly any money in a cheap property. Real estate options provide more flexibility and low-cost trading and investment opportunities to the buyers of the options, although there's fairly limited benefits that go to the seller. Options are a way to control undervalued property without putting terribly much down, so it actually gives ownership, or let's say not ownership, it gives control of the property without the burden of ownership. There are no rates and taxes, because until you've settled on the property you don't actually own it, so you're not liable for the rates and taxes. You don't need to borrow money in order to purchase an option, so there are no mortgages, and as a consequence there's no interest that you have to pay. The high leverage allows you to put down a very small deposit and you control the entire property. So if a property is $500,000 value and you put down say $5,000 or $10,000, you're controlling $500,000 for just that small amount of capital. Now, how we trade real estate options, it's not really like lease options at all. It's more like trading on the share market, doing equities and futures. Now, what we might do is we could hold the option until expiry date and exercise the option so that we close on the property and we actually end up owning it ourselves. We may wish to live in it, we may just simply hold on to it for a while longer and then actually sell it to get our capital profit. We also like to participate in the appreciation of the property when we see it moving rapidly, and in such instances we'll sell those options to an investor. And we have unique ways that we actually go about selling the options to investors, because we don't actually initially intend to sell the long-dated option that we hold. What we prefer to do is to actually write short-dated options, and every time those short-dated options expire we write additional short-dated options and obtain premiums. So there's a lot of money to be made writing short-dated options while you hold the long-dated option. Now, professional option trading involves both investing and trading of real estate options. You can hold for the long term, and as I mentioned, we can be writing short-term options, but we can also simply hold the option for a shorter period and turn it over and sell it when we actually see we've got a significant appreciation. Trading is done continuously. We look for investors wishing to purchase the options where we can make good profit. The investors actually have the money, and there's no worry about us having to deal with tenant buyers who don't have the money. Now, we get involved in both the buying of the options and also in selling options, and we write short-term options and continually turn them over for fast profits. And what we make is a lot more than what lease option trading can do. Yes, it's slightly more complex than lease options, not by far. It just means that there are additional agreements, legal contracts that need to be entered into or drafted and then entered into. There's the normal purchase contract for the sale of the property, which sets the specific terms, including the price that the property is being offered at, and at which the option is being purchased. And there are option contracts, one for call options and another one for put options. But that's basically the extent of the legal agreements that need to be made. There's also various trading strategies, whereas with lease options there's very little trading, there's very little strategy. There is the need for ongoing management of the options, and there's decision making, so we have a look at what the appreciation is, we have a look at the value of the option, and we have a look at the market in terms of investors, what we're being offered for the sale of the option. Now there's similarities with the equity markets, with Forex, derivatives and futures trading, and there's certainly a little bit of real estate in there as well. Now over the years I've managed some supplementary businesses to go along with the options in the area of mortgage management, and in particular mortgage acceleration. This is actually a concept that I invented and released to the public in 1990, and what we ended up doing was to fix a mortgage extinction period of around about 15 years. So that allowed us then to write options for 15 years and to hold the options for that period of time, which is certainly substantially a lot longer than what lease options are being held for, and on the average that they go for only around about 3 or 4 years. Now, if you'd like to discover more as to how you can make a lot more money than lease options, how you can actually operate your own real estate option trading business, and if you're serious enough to want to learn more and ready to get started, then basically you can get started. All you need to do is to click here. The returns that you can make trading options with us with a highly leveraged approach gives you an infinite ROI. It's tax advantaged, more so than average real estate, the properties themselves. There's low cost, so there's little out of pocket, and there's enormous profit opportunities. You can have an obligation-free discovery chat simply by connecting with me on LinkedIn, and all you need to do is to click here on the link and contact me, or just go to LinkedIn itself. Thank you for watching.